Fun. Hi everybody, welcome to the Endurance School, and thank you for joining us tonight. Today we are so excited to be talking to Kolie Moore of Empirical Cycling and the Empirical Cycling Podcast. Coley coaches professional, elite, and amateur athletes of all disciplines and at all levels. He's consulted for World Tour teams, World Champions, national team coaches, and is part of the WKO development group that creates and tests new and advanced cycling analytics.
Kyle and his co-host, Kolie and his co-host Kyle launched the Empirical Cycling Podcast in March of 2019 and just passed 100,000 downloads in October. The podcast blends hardcore physiology with sensible training advice and seems to have found a dedicated audience in the cycling community. Away from coaching, Kolie is a medalist at the U.S. Cycling National Championships, a former Taekwondo instructor and competitor, and got his BS in biochemistry from Boston University.
Actually, biology, not biochemistry.
Biology, sorry.
Different.
I studied biochemistry pretty intensively there, but close enough, yeah.
Kolie, welcome to Detention.
Thank you for giving me detention.
That is actually our first question for everybody, and the way that we have to kick off all of these. Is this your first time in detention? Tell us about your middle school detention experience. Were you the kid who never got in trouble, or tell us more?
I think one of my friends once convinced me to skip class with him, and I did. Because some of the other miscreant kids did that too, and then the teacher obviously noticed, and I got internal suspension. Oh wait, was that for something else? No, I got in trouble like a little bit, but I was just pretty straight-laced for the most part.
You're in good company.
I got in trouble later. I saved that for when I was 20.
Awesome.
Got it. Yeah, Molly and I are very often like, oh, our guests did not have our middle and high school experiences. We were like the bad kids.
Oh, you guys were the bad kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently, because every guest we have is like, no, we didn't really get to spend much time in detention.
I was busy playing sports.
Yeah. I spent 45 days in detention in 7th grade.
Wow.
I know. Yeah, it was intense.
Were you going for a record or something like that? Competing with somebody?
Yeah, it just wasn't a good year. it was a tough one. Speaking of difficult years, this whole thing we're doing, the Endurance School, has been basically part of our COVID-19 project as a way to stay engaged with athletes and do everything like that. What has this year sort of made room for you to work on?
Not much, actually. It's actually because of for me personally, because of the additional stress. Like when everything started locking down, I immediately thought I'm going to lose half my client base or more, and I didn't. It grew, which was great because everybody, I think cyclists especially for some reason are very internally motivated, and I think there's a lot of people who think that racing kind of gets in the way of training sometimes. And we're very happy to just keep training. And a lot of people made a lot of great progress. And, other people didn't make some progress and learned a couple things. But it's been, we did the VO2 Max series. That was really intense for me to do the research. But I had the time to do it. And I'm also the ECCC conference director, so the Eastern Collegiate Cycling Conference. And so we had no racing. Sorry, college folks out there in the Northeast. I had to cancel everything, obviously. So that freed up a lot of weekends. But a lot of it was just spent being stressed out. And I think a lot of athletes share that same experience too. So, yeah.
Have you had to do any additional management of the ECCC, since everything's been canceled? What has that been like about trying to talk to those athletes and kind of communicate? Are they still going to have a sport at some point?
No, I mean, in the Northeast, everybody's actually pretty chill about it because, our local governments, ECCC goes from, it's Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and then to the northeast. That's us. And our local governments are taking everything pretty seriously, and the schools especially too. So very few teams can travel or do anything, or even like be in a group with a cycling related kit on. So they were like, yeah, we get it. We can't attend. So why would you hold this thing? Where one team's going to show up. So yeah, they've been okay with it, but mostly it's been dealing with USA Cycling internally, which we don't have to get into right now.
I am happy to divert the conversation to your podcast. You just hit 100,000 downloads, which is pretty incredible. Congratulations on that, first off.
Thank you.
And what does that number mean to you? What does that signify for you and your show?
I mean, it doesn't change much really, because we're still getting only like 2,000 to 4,000 listens an episode, which is pretty respectable, I think, for a couple of just a couple of guys just talking about lactate and whatever else.
Right.
But I mean, it was one of those things where I was like, this is a reason to celebrate, but it didn't resonate with me personally, because none of that kind of stuff does. I'm just not wired like that. But I was like, this is good. It's a good reason to do a audience, listeners question episode, which I really really enjoy. So I'm always looking for an excuse to do one of those.
Yeah, we've tried to do a few mailbag episodes, and we're just our like listenership isn't quite wide enough yet, and so we sort of end up being like, all right, Molly, what are we going to talk about tonight?
Right. Chris, what'd you have for breakfast?
Right. Yeah. Why don't you tell me about your training? So you launched the show in March of 2019. What led to that decision? Why did you decide that was something that you wanted to do or thought was a good decision?
I was making just barely enough with coaching to pay my bills, but I wouldn't have anything on top of that for like taxes or like, fun things to do. So I was working as a carpenter pretty much full time up here in Boston, which I've been doing since I was 18 as a side gig, on and off, and mostly on for the last 15 years. I was coming home tired and sore every night, and I was just grumpy and I hated it, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. Because it was always like a side gig. I didn't ever want to do that for the rest of my life, and I was just miserable. And I was like, all right, just eat and pray. I'm gonna make a podcast, just send it out into the ether. Because I had written a couple articles before that, and I had been contacted by some people who were like, yeah, we want to hear what you need to say about this, that, and the other thing. I had done some consultations and stuff, and I was told that I had a unique understanding. And I was like, well, if this is true, people might listen to it. And if it's not, they won't, and I'll just be embarrassed. By putting out something that everybody listens to and goes, ugh, and then turns it off. And and I was like, yeah, I can suffer that if it happens. But it was just like hoping to put something out there where people would go, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. I think I can hire him to coach me. It's worked out pretty well.
What's something that you ran into in the podcast creation process, or like the production process, that you weren't expecting? What's something that you were like, oh, okay, this isn't what I thought was going to be?
Oh yeah, we recorded the first episode like 3 times before the episode that actually went out, because we didn't know how to structure it. We just started by talking, and we got way off. Like we couldn't focus. And so what we did was we started writing a Google Doc as an outline, and then following that, and they gradually got more and more and more detailed. So at one point, I think the longest one that we've done was 10 pages of just an outline. I think that might have been one of the VO2 Max episodes. And so yeah, we pretty much read from that, but kind of riff and. Yeah, that was one of the things that was the hardest to do, was get used to pacing the show in a way that made sense given the things that we're talking about, because it's not just hey, how you doing? What's going on today, Kyle? it's like having that logic flow and be able to have an audience understand it. That's been the most difficult part of what we're doing.
I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you could really easily have a product in the notes for the VO2 Max episodes in like some kind of like VO2 Max compendium, like something that people can read along in their books. It's a great.
I had thought about publishing the notes, but once in a while, like one of us will, write like a dirty joke in the notes.
Totally.
And I'm like, we can't, we can't do that. Or it'll like have like how one of us actually feels about a thing with lots of curse words and this person, this, that, the other thing, and it's like, we can't put that out there, which it's just for fun. We don't really mean it, but.
Well, yeah, and it would put you in the place of like having to not only edit the show, but then also edit the like creation documents, and there's
so much extra work, and I honestly, like if there's software out there where like it can just be transcripted, that would be great. But shoot me an email, anybody out there if you know something like that, where I can just hit a button and it'll shoot out a script, and I can go in and edit the biochemical terms and make sure they're right and spelled correctly, and then that'd be cool. But it's so much extra work, and I don't want to do that much work.
No. We just from when we were chatting before we went live, you have a background in audio engineering. Does that background feed into the way that you think about structuring and making a show?
Not really. Mostly it feeds into the production of the show itself. I mean, I forget what microphone model this is. It was one of the ones that I used for voiceover when I was an engineer. SM7B, that's it. And I was like, okay, so I need a good mic, I can do an okay audio converter, and I just need some free software, and so I just use GarageBand, because it's non-destructive editing, and that's it. It's that's really all it comes down to. People listen to it and they go, wow, this doesn't sound awful. That's the only thing where it really shows up.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I noticed right away was just how good it sounds, and it's just so important. There's too many podcasts out there. It sounds tinny audio and there's terrible background noise, and people don't monitor their breathing, and it's just a nightmare.
Yeah, anybody out there who's doing a podcast, the secret is compression, and a lot of it, a whole lot of compression. Like if I see the meter go, like when somebody's speaking, go anywhere below like the red, I'm like, I gotta turn this up.
I'm adjusting our audio controls right now. Just to be.
But I've got a mastering limiter on it too, so it's not gonna like clip or anything.
Okay.
So I kind of want to get back to that. Like you had mentioned that a few people had said, like, all right, you have this unique understanding about either FTP testing or you're training too hard for criteriums, like those articles that you put out. Could you? I know this is like one of those things. This question is like, could you summarize your life? But how did you arrive there? If you could kind of give us an overview of your coaching development, I think that would be really cool.
Oh, sure. I mean, I've always been really fascinated by how and why things work, but like mechanical things. Like I used to really want to get into cars when I was young, and then when I realized how much they cost and how much money I was going to be making as a musician, I had to like, oh god, I got to not do that for a while. Like how things work has always fascinated me. Like how, when I breathe in, what's happening? When I eat this food, what's happening? When I go to sleep, what's happening? The how and why of everything fascinates me, and it was always kind of like in the back of my mind. And so after not making it as an audio engineer and a rock musician, I kind of spun my wheels as a carpenter for a little while, and then one day I was like, I feel my brain getting stupid. Like it's like the muscle is not there anymore. So I started reading pop science books, and then I started reading like really intense pop science books, like how the mind works and stuff like that, and like the other guy, I forget his name. Anyway, and so from there I was like, I think I want to go to science. I want to be a bench scientist. That would be the awesomest thing in the world. And so I applied to Boston University to go to their metropolitan school, which is their evening continuing education program. And then they said, you've got to do, you've already got a bachelor's degree. I have one in music production from 2004. And they were like, all right, so you just have to take these classes. And I did. And like, as I was going, I was finding out like, oh, that's the question I've had since I was 4. Oh, now I know why that and this. And it was like the world just opened up to me. And while I was doing that, I was also, like everybody, I rode my bike a little bit, but I started commuting. And then I decided one day on a commute, when I was passing somebody, I was like, I want to race bikes. That sounds awesome. And so I did that. And then, like, my bike racing with learning, the really detailed metabolic pathways all happened at the same time. So it was this really nice confluence of everything. And while I was going to class, I had to fight to get into biochem too, because it was not normally a class associated with the biology major, but I was so into it. I was like, can I please do this? It was at like 9 o'clock in the morning, like Tuesdays and Thursdays, like not a usual night school time. And it was with Hans Kornberg, who worked with the Hans Krebs. Like I still have books by them. Like, there you go.
Awesome.
Krebs and Kornberg.
Oh my God.
Energy transformations and living matter. I read it every once in a while because it's so beautiful. It's a lot of that stuff really still holds up today, despite the advances and everything. That's like the foundations of modern biochemistry. And that's the kind of stuff I was learning while I was on the bike. And I'm like, oh, so right now I'm using carbohydrates or fat or what's happening? So I started with the ground floor of exercise physiology. And I got to like build up into my understanding of exercise physiology from my understanding of biochemistry, where I think a lot of people who just go to school for exercise physiology, they get some of these classes, but it's not their entire focus. Their entire focus is like the emergent phenomena that we can breathe out or lactate in the blood or something like that, and interpreting those. And my understanding was a couple levels below that, and that's where I think that was my development, like really as a coach, is learning. Oh wow, so if this, that, and the other thing, then if we do this on the bike, it should affect this. And like everything just started falling together. And now, of course, I'm at that point. I like to think off the Dunning-Kruger curve. Kruger.
Never say it out loud.
I'm at the bottom where I feel like I know absolutely nothing, and there's so much more to learn up there, and I'll never get there. So, that's my development as a coach with science.
When did you and WKO when did you come together with that sort of software, and how did that happen?
Oh, I was I heard about that software because I didn't use WKO 3 or 3 Plus, but when 4 came out, I thought, oh, that looks really cool. I should. It was like $180, and at the time I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. But I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this, and so I got it, and I started playing around with it. And at the time, compared to what it is now, it was pretty crude, but there's still a lot of cool stuff that you can do. And so I was writing a blog that is now gone, and what happened after that? I think it got linked somewhere, because I think Tim at the time was just searching like WKO4, and I was like, this, scientists, I was like, this version, 163 of WKO4, like, was this is what this analysis was done with, and, in case the algorithm changes, and underneath people have a reference for, oh, it was this version of this thing, like a regular scientist, and so. So I think that got shared somewhere or something like that. And then I discovered the Facebook group. And so I joined the Facebook group, and it was really small. It was like a couple hundred people, maybe if that. Because it was just brand new. It was like just getting out there with the product launch. And I started posting in there. And that's basically where Tim found me. And he asked me to at one point they were asking like, does anybody want to do like articles with using WKO4, and then Tim asked me to do a webinar, or he asked if anybody wants to do a webinar. And I was like, I'll do a webinar, yeah. And I was at the time transitioning to just being nothing but a sprinter, and I guess my sprint stuff impressed him enough that he was like, you want to do a webinar on sprinting? I was like, yeah, I do, of course. Sounds awesome. And so I did, and then that was really the start of it, because at the time I had to work with one of our chart geniuses, William Renfro, and I was like, Bill, this is what I want to do with this chart, and it ended up being the force velocity graph, and that was a lot of fun too, because that was the first time that I realized that, like, oh yeah, there's actually, we can mine data, not really mine data, but like we can have better physiological insight than we think we can with just by looking at like average power and cadence and stuff like that. And so that's where it all started. And then then from there they're like, hey, you want to consult with us on training impact score? And I was like, yes. He was like, pays crap, and I'm like, it's great, it's fine. Let's do this.
It's keeping me safe from carpentry.
Right.
Not at that point. But yeah, that was the hope. So that led me to getting a little more confident in knowing what I was talking about. And even then, I still don't feel like I know what I'm talking about. There's so much research that goes into like one statement on the podcast.
Yeah. I hear you.
So you have had a lot of different pathways, I guess, that have led you to where you are now. Who are the people who have been consistent mentors for you through any of those lenses, either now and in physiology and coaching, or who have you brought with you along the way?
Oh God. Kyle, obviously. Kyle kicked my ass up a hill in like 2013 or 14 for like 32nd place in an ECCC race, and we've been friends ever since. Because we were like looking at each other. It was like me, him, and like one guy from UMass, and we're like, it's like the final hill's coming up. We're all eyeing each other like, I'm gonna beat this guy. I'm gonna beat this guy. And Kyle like rides away, doing exactly what I thought I was gonna do. Up the hill behind him, like panting. I'm like, that was amazing. And we've been friends ever since. Kyle is one of the best people I've ever known, and he's been a great sounding board for everything. Because if I think I know something, I can explain it to him, and he can tell me why it's dumb, or like, oh yeah, maybe you got something. So him, through the WKO, obviously Tim Cusick has been really, really great. Without him, I probably wouldn't be anywhere right now. And Dean Golich, who I don't know where he went. We were in regular contact for a while, but going through Dean's stuff, there's one like Training Peaks webinar from Dean from like forever ago, and still on YouTube. I highly recommend anybody watch it. I think it's something modeling and coaching something interpretations. I forget the title of it, but it's a really good watch, and I watch it every maybe once a year or so. Just because there's always another thing that pops out at me. So Tim, Dean, Kyle, and there's one more person, and I'm going to be so apologetic to them.
Sorry, guys.
I remember them. My bad.
It'll come back as soon as we ask the next question. It'll come back anytime. And then we can just come back to that. What do you think is the reason that the show has had the success that it's had?
Well, I don't know if it's had that much success. I mean, there are certain podcasts that have 20,000 or more downloads per episode, which is funny because when I listen to those, I can't listen for more than like 5 minutes without cringing at something that's physiologically inaccurate or just flat wrong. It's just, oh God, not again. I got to stop listening to this. But they do it good enough that it helps a lot of people, with their training, and that's fine. And I have no problems with that at all. So I don't think it's that successful really compared to stuff like that. I mean, it's successful enough in that I can be a full-time coach now, and that's really like the most wonderful thing. So in that vein, it's been very much a success.
Let me. I'll take another pass at that question then, because I'm so interested.
I think I biffed it. I'm sorry.
No. I think you answered it. I think I asked it poorly, because like clearly it has spoken to a number of people, and so I guess my question is like, what hole do you feel like you're sort of filling for those people that they're not finding elsewhere?
Oh, I think it's this, like the people who feel the same way I do about training, like the why people, the annoying people, like the why this, why that, mom, dad. I think that's where it comes from, because I think a lot of the time in cycling training, you get told a certain thing yields a certain result, and a lot of the time we find that it's not that easy. And knowing, the deeper things under that can really help make training decisions. And so, it's not for the people who just want a canned training plan and, all right, can I do like a couch to 10K or, something like that, without thinking about it too much. Because, some of my friends are casual athletes, and they ask me training advice. And it usually ends up they are regretting they asked me training advice, because I have a hard time making anything simple until I really, really understand it. So I think that's what it fills in, is people who just, why.
It's funny that you say that, because I think one of the things that I find about the show is that you do a very good job of explaining like deeply complex ideas in a fairly constrained amount of time. And that was one of my big questions, was like, how does this guy do this?
I don't know. It took 8 hours to explain VO2 max. And the next series that I'm just gearing up to work on is going to be on, I think it's going to be on the basics of metabolism. And how, and hopefully trying to make every episode apply to something, but I don't think we're going to be able to do that. Like it's because the electron transport chain, like there's it's going to take a little while to explain, and it's going to be necessary to understand everything else. But I don't know if I can make that relate to regular training and bike racing. Well, I'll do the best I can. What was the question? I'm not sure I answered it.
Well, I mean, like, I think, for as complex as VO2 max is, like 6 episodes is like pretty good. Like that was a pretty good compression. But I don't know, I find myself understanding what you're saying pretty quickly, and that's not easy. And like, I'm interested in how you developed that skill, or where that background came from.
Oh, I mean, I think anybody who's ever been in academia for, a little while, and can tell you that the best way to understand something yourself is to explain it to someone else, because it really makes you question, oh, do I actually know this, or did I just like read it in a magazine and I should probably chase it down? That's really what I think it comes down to, is, a lot of the times, actually, I've written entire podcast episodes because I wanted to do research on something. And now that's pretty much what it is. Where I'm like, man, I really want to dig into this thing. And I had always wanted to dig into the VO2 max intervals, because they had been, I didn't invent like high cadence VO2 max intervals, like not by a long shot, but they were told to me like, oh, this is going to reduce muscle damage, and it's going to do this and that and the other thing. And I was like, I'm not sure that's exactly why it works. And I seriously started the VO2 max series like looking to get to there, without knowing if I was actually going to have anything concrete at the end.
I think that's one of the things that that certainly resonated with me. I know has resonated with Chris, and I think resonates with a lot of people. Is that there are so many things that are out there in the endurance world about, you know, just truths that have become truth because, like you said in one of your podcasts, because everybody says them. And I think you guys do a great job of drilling down to like the actual reality that those truths are based on. Or if they're not true, dispelling a lot of myths. Can you tell us what you, like, if you could get rid of any of the like myths that are out there in the endurance training world, what would you attack first?
Oh God. I've spent so long, you know, kind of trying to confirm or debunk things in my own head that I don't even know what training myths are anymore. If you give me a couple, I can tell you if like which one I'd rather, you know, shoot down first, or if it's a myth at all.
So one of the ones that I loved was I just started over again recently also. So like I just listened to the FTP conversations at the beginning, and one of the things that you guys get into is the idea, like the American work ethic, that if you just work as hard as you can, that you're going to get better.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in a way that's true, but in a way that's like horribly not true. Because I think that's, you know, what a lot of average athletes just want to do is just like feel like they got a workout in, and not that there's nothing wrong with that at all. But when you're really trying to, you know, become, you know, the best athlete you can be, you know, you really have to figure out how to get the most bang for the buck. And you know, as you know, you guys as coaches, you know, as well as anybody who you know, other coaches or athletes who are very serious, that fatigue and recovery are as big a part of it as the training. Because you know, if somebody's like, you know, training too hard, or they're too stressed, or they're not getting enough sleep, or whatever it is, like they're not going to recover, and that's really going to screw you in the long run. And yeah, I think if we've done an okay job kind of saying that that's like not the best thing to do, to feel wrecked after every workout. I did a consult for one guy where that was literally what he was doing, and he was very, very experienced cyclist. And I was like, if you take a week off the bike, you're gonna feel so good. And I'm still not sure he has. But you know, in other ways, like with just regular volume training, just, you know, packing on the miles, even if they're kind of easy, like that is one thing where you can just do a lot of work. And a lot of people, if they did more, would probably be faster cyclists in general. So that's one of the places where doing more work can be good, but it's not one of those things where you need to be dead at the end to have it be really, really effective. And in fact, you know, if you're not dead, then you can do more tomorrow, and that's going to be even better.
So, as someone who has really dug into research and tried to find good source material, do you have recommendations for athletes who are doing the same and not sure how reliable their source material is?
No. I mean, because there's a lot of excellent studies published, and there's a lot of studies that, you know, I wouldn't qualify them as excellent, but are perhaps missing some puzzle pieces that, you know, I think you know, I'm not going to fault them for that at all, because I think if I were in academia right now doing this research, I would be in the same boat as them. I have the luxury of a lot of time, um, you know, between writing workouts and, you know, talking to athletes and stuff like that, where I get to just read anything I want. And I've been doing that, you know, as long as I can remember. And so I just, you know, I get to really dig into things and find out the why of everything, where, you know, a lot of academics and the people who are doing research, they have to spend so much more time in the lab. Like it's a real full-time, or full-time, more than full-time job. um, and Yeah, so it's really difficult to separate the really excellent studies from the studies that leave something to be desired. Like, oh, I wish they had looked at this, or I wish they had known about this threshold, or, you know, that this protocol, you know, biases things in this way. Like sometimes even like studies that look at MLSS, just their protocol for finding MLSS is like, we're going to do this and we're going to do this protocol. And if we still find that this isn't quite there, we're going to use the higher one. But even then it's like, you still got to go higher than that. And so it can like underestimate, and that really skews the data. So it can happen with most studies. And there are a few excellent scientists out there. But I would say for the most part, you cannot go wrong with anybody who is academically related to like Ed Coyle or Walter Herzog or Keith Barr, and John Halsey, obviously, and all of them. So pretty much the classics, the big hitters, the heavy hitters.
One of the first articles you published on Training Peaks was about the new ways of testing FTP, and then the podcast kind of started with a series of episodes on FTP. And I know that one of the conversations I routinely have with athletes is about like trying to alter their understanding of FTP. I've got, as always, I have like multiple questions wrapped into one. Sure. The first one is, could you tell us a little bit about that alternate method of testing that you published on Training Peaks, and how you developed it? And then also like ways that you talk with your athletes about FTP. It's kind of a three-parter there.
Okay, what was the first one? Let's start there.
First part is, how did you talk to it? Tell it, like, walk us through that that protocol that you have for finding FTP. And I know that you said on the podcast, like, you're like, well, actually, I don't really use that too often because a lot of times I already have the data from races or whatnot. But that was a really good starting point protocol, and we've used it for some of our athletes. So just how did you decide upon it?
Oh, I actually don't remember, honestly. I forget if I did it. I forget if I did it first or I had one of my athletes do it first. Where I think I like snuck in because, at the time I was just discovering kind of the mechanism of FTP workouts and, lengthening them and, how that affected everything. And so I was giving people longer intervals. And, we would do like, typical like 3x15, 3x20, blah, 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 2x30. And then I was like, I think I can sneak in a long interval and have it actually be a test. And I think I did that to somebody else first. Usually I experiment myself first, but in this case, I don't think I did because it was just, so what if it's just an interval? And then later, I had a couple people come up to me because I think I was coaching at MIT at the time. I had some people come up to me like, did you sneak in an FTP test on us, like a long one? And because I was scared too, like I really was, because when I was just starting to train, my coach at the time was like, 20-minute test, don't go longer or you're going to screw yourself up for a week, like or longer. Like it's going to take you so long to recover from a 40K time trial. And I was like, oh God, I can't ever do that to anybody. And I was like, but intervals nobody's dead from like a 2x30 FTP unless it's set really wrong. And so, so that's how it developed, was just sneaking it in. And because I had WKO4, you see the whole smooth power curve. I was like, oh yeah, like FTP is right there. It's just this inflection point. And so I just endeavored to get people to get to that inflection point, and that was it. So the protocol is really just starting a little under that, because your body does take a little time to warm up. And actually, one of the biggest things in cycling and exercise physiology stuff, like testing in general, is the warm-ups are not long enough. Like if you do like a ramp test, if your warm-up is like 5 minutes at 50 watts or 100 watts and you start there, and then like from like dead fresh, like that's going to affect RER, and it's going to affect lactate and stuff like that. So a good long warm-up, start a little easy. And then what's funny is in the article, I actually didn't at the time, or I did at the time, use some of those the progressions with some athletes, but for the most part, I just bring everybody right to the last one of like start a little low and then just ramp it up until you feel that threshold and just peg it there and just go until you crack. And that's really good early season, especially or after a layoff when there's no maximal data and you're not really sure what somebody's legs are. But after some racing and testing and sometimes I'll just tell somebody like, go give me a 15 to 35 minute time trial. Sometimes that's enough to like, and then, we can just use the model, but it depends on, where the athlete's at. And if I think they've hit a rut with the FTP stuff, that's in the second FTP testing episode, we talked about people hitting a rut and relying on the model a little more. So there's a lot of ways to approach it, but you're really looking for just that inflection point of above this point, you're going to fatigue faster. Below this point, you fatigue slower. That's the whole thing. That is MLSS. That's FTP, lactate threshold, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So what you're kind of finding there is you're really nailing down that time to exhaustion metric.
Yeah. That's a very, very important one. Yeah.
Because that's where that tends to be where the fall off happens, like not long after they hit that FTP number.
Yeah, and I've actually had some interesting discussions with athletes of like, oh, I wasn't really at a 10 out of 10. And I'm like, whether it's like 60 minutes or 63 minutes, like it's the same difference. It's not 30 minutes and it's not 80 minutes. Like that's one of the big differences.
I think it's possible that some of the folks in the audience or listening right now maybe heard you say 2x30 at FTP isn't going to kill anyone, and possibly had a pretty physical reaction to that. Can you maybe address some of the misunderstandings about how hard FTP should feel?
Oh yeah, FTP should feel like. Actually, I didn't even come up with this. It was somebody Hunter Allen knows. Discomfortable is how FTP should feel. So like during a test, I usually describe it and using this description, like 95% of the time, people will absolutely nail it on the first try, even if they're like not that experienced with long intervals or anything like that, where you're riding. And if you ride a little harder, you realize that your legs are not long for this world. But if you like bring it just a little down and you go, man, I can suffer like this for a while. And you go, oh, I have to suffer like this for a while. Like that's right where you should be. And when you describe it to somebody like that, like for instance, one of my athletes after a long, excellent season of winter endurance training, he his FTP had been like 330 watts for like 40 minutes or something like that. And then after all that, it was 80 minutes. He went for 80 minutes at 330. And I was like, all right, just to confirm this, we're going to do, I'm going to make you ride at 345, 350 watts. And he could only make it like 20 or 25 minutes or something like that.
Interesting.
And I was like, yeah, so that's that point where like, just above that, he fatigued a lot faster. And just below that, like, it's like, oh, your sweet spot intervals are going to be like, oh, man. So we actually had to bump his FTP up just to get the intervals into a reasonable range.
I think get discomfortable with discomfort is the new endurance school t-shirt at this point.
Yeah. we have to find out what discomfortable translates to in Latin. So like one of the things that we were really stoked to listen to is in one of the podcasts you talk about like pacing an endurance ride eventually through RPE. Like, should we use heart rate? Should we use power? Yes to both, but really like RPE is the thing that would get you there. And that's kind of what you just described with the FTP, figuring that out, is that it should really feel this certain way. Sometimes getting athletes to like believe you or understand like what different levels of intensity should feel like. How do you communicate that concept to your athletes?
I mean, I just tell them, like, look, especially when we start working together, if they're very numbers focused, and they're very much a student of the old school method. Because I used to be like that too. I know where they're coming from. I used to think, endurance rides had to be in this range, and if I just do peg it like right at the top of zone 2 before I hit zone 3, like 10 watts below, like this is gonna be a better endurance workout than if I just went a little lower and a lot longer. And when actually the opposite's probably true. Yeah, I just tell them. And I think also, one of the things that I do, I don't know if you all do it, but I write every workout by hand. I type every workout out every single week for everybody, which gets a little tedious sometimes, obviously. But but it allows me to like go into my notes file for that athlete and go, okay, this is what this person's working on, and look at the comments from the last couple of weeks and kind of triangulate on where they're at and where their head's at. And then I can use that to, maybe use some different cues about how things should feel when they're riding. And that can help a lot of the time. So like endurance riding, especially, I always tell people like, you should feel like you're working, but not like you're working. Like you should be able to do it all day, not a problem. You might have to eat, you've got to drink, sure, but you really should feel very comfortable with that. And I can't really do much endurance riding myself anymore these days. But on the odd chance that I do go, I think I can stand an hour without dying. I can find it right away because I know what it feels like. And yeah, and I think once people get attuned to that and get the numbers out of their head, it gets a lot easier because for a lot of people, their all day endurance pace is like 80% of FTP. It's not 60%, it's not 68%. It's like 78 to 80% of FTP, and they can really do it for like 8 hours. But some people it's like 60%, 65%. And it's up to you to find that. But when you start going over that threshold, metabolically it starts to change a little bit, and you want to avoid that because you can get a lot more adaptation by just riding a little under that threshold. Actually, it actually is a threshold, like it's LT1.
Yeah.
And you can find it by feel. And it's different for everybody, where it is relative to FTP and VO2 max. So and it changes with fatigue and with sleep and hydration and diet and all sorts of things. So it's best that a person kind of sorts it out on the day, and it's going to change through the ride. One of my athletes, he got a lactate meter recently, and he's been doing a lot of testing, and his LT1 changes through a ride. Like it's only like 10 or 15 or 20 watts, but like he'll start out at 220 and he'll end a ride at like 245.
He's taking lactate samples on his bike ride?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I tell him just stop, get your thing done, and just continue. And your body's not going to like chew through that lactate immediately, unless you've just done a really hard effort. So you can do that. Nice. I don't recommend it. I mean, it can also drive you nuts. Analysis by paralysis or vice versa, whatever that phrase is, and over analysis of everything. Like it's super simple to just sort it out yourself on the day, like when you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we love that because there's so many numbers and conditions, that like you're as a coach, you're so at a loss to be like, it's this number, and you're like,
yeah,
like, I can't tell you it's that number.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I've got a couple athletes where they're like, man, this is so boring. Like, because they're indoors and stuff, and they're on the trainers and they're on Zwift, and it's not exciting enough. And I get that. And we do a couple things here and there to like make it a little less boring, like some leg speed stuff and we play with the cadence and stuff. But it does get boring. And they're like, can I just really please just set 180 watts and just leave it there? And I'm like, okay, but you promise if you feel like you're working, you're going to bring it down. and they promise. And a lot of times I'll see that like that stair step of like, man, am I here today? Am I here today? But starting too hard is a problem. So you never want to start too hard. That's something I advise to everybody if they're going to like erg mode it. Just start 30 watts easier than you think you need to, then adjust up to it. If you start over, like you start digging a hole right away.
That's smart. I like that. So we have a question from chat that I want to get to, and also for other folks who are out there, feel free to drop questions into chat.
Sure.
But somebody wants to know a little bit about your workout planning process, and I know you said you write them all by hand. What workouts do you save, if any, to the workout library? He's especially he or she, I'm not sure who this is especially interested in the VO2 max workouts, which are different from how most people approach them.
Yeah, none. I started doing that a long time ago, but I immediately stopped because I kept having to like go in and like rewrite everything anyway. With VO2 max workouts, it's different to coach those than it is to coach anything else, because some people will do really well with the longer efforts. Not everybody, most people don't actually. Most people like the really short ones. I try to mix it up because, as the fatigue goes on, like through doing more VO2 max training, because I try to get somebody to do a lot of VO2 max training at once and, just get all that adaptation. Then we can really focus on the other stuff, because, the fatigue is different when you're working different things. So VO2 max fatigue is different from like sprint fatigue, is different from endurance fatigue. Just to keep everything nice and simple, I try to block it off like that. We don't always, obviously, but some people that doesn't work. But for the most part, I try to. And so, like doing VO2 max stuff, we'll start with like, sometimes I'll even let people like get crazy. Like, all right, you can do as many of these intervals as you want, but as soon as your legs are empty, you stop and then you get off the bike and you eat something. And say, okay. And usually nobody gets past like 24 minutes or something like that. So we usually shoot for like 15 to 20 minutes of really good hard interval time. And some people are, some people it's like, we got to like adjust the cadence right, or we've got to adjust the rest intervals right, or, they're not resting long enough. We got to talk about that. There's 1,000 different things that can happen with an athlete, and it's very individual. There is a middle ground that, probably half of people it works fine for, but, the other half, we really have to adjust, as we go. And so I just write workouts week to week. Like I schedule a week, next week, and the next week. Some people need a couple weeks as they're like nutritionist needs to know stuff, things like that. But, for the most part, that's what we do because it gives us the most amount of flexibility, while I'm also like always looking down the calendar to make sure that we're not going to, we're always on target for our long-term goals too. But not that there was any of that this year, really. This year was just train until you're tired and then take some time off.
That sort of heads straight into the next question I had, which is, what are your signs that an athlete does need some time off, like, or like some recovery?
Oh, I mean, that's, I'm sure that's the same thing that, you look for. It's just, the emojis, a lot of frowny faces, or, the disconnect between the emoji and the RPE. Like if somebody's emoji is like, frowny face, but the RPE is like 3, and it's like, uh-oh, what happened here? Like it's comments, it's looking at the power data, looking at trends in the data, like heart rate. When somebody's really, really fit and heart rate typically doesn't decouple that much. If it decouples a lot, it's like, are you okay? Did you eat? Did you sleep? Then you start, asking these questions. And a lot of the time, like my athletes know me by now. And when they have a bad workout, sleep was fine. I'm a little stressed. Maybe I should have bailed. Like they know the questions that are coming. But yeah, it's not just like one thing. It's like it's a bunch of things, and you kind of put them all on the scale, or I don't know what the right metaphor is, but they all pull the levers a little bit, and then you kind of figure out, what does this person need? And 9 times out of 10, it's rest. Very, very infrequently are things going badly and it needs more training. So yeah, so usually it's I would say if anybody wants like a rule of thumb, like 2 workouts in a row that don't go well, then it's probably time to take a rest.
I'm very happy you just said that last part. That rest is very often the thing. Most triathletes really need to hear that.
I mean, actually, it's funny because one of I won't say who because I don't want to throw any triathletes they've worked with under the bus, but one of those people that I had mentioned previously when talking about coaching triathletes said, one of the things about triathletes is that they have a hard time getting faster because they're always going just kind of hard, but not hard enough or easy enough to really adapt. And so I've coached a triathlete. I coached one duathlete before, but I've actually moved away from coaching multi-sport because there's just so many regular cyclists to coach, and that's a whole nother dimension of things. So I'll leave it up to you two to tell me whether that stereotype is true or not.
Yeah, I mean, go for it, Mal.
No, I would really like to know what you see as the biggest difference between coaching multi-sport athletes and cyclists.
I mean, because when I'm coaching them, there's really not that many differences. It's just they do the workouts and that's that. The pacing's a little different because like a competitive road cyclist time trial, like it can be like a 25-minute uphill time trial, like Joe Martin or something like that, and that's different to coach than like a Olympic distance duathlon. It's pacing, but the physiology is the same. I'll give people slightly different workouts, in triathlon, you're under threshold a lot, like, all the time, unless you're, doing one of those weird Philly things where you're just climbing all those hills. That would be a triathlon competitive road cyclists would be good at, except for the running part. Maybe not. Okay.
Yeah, that is the struggle for the cyclists that I know. They're like, running? I'm like, yeah. I mean, you're going to be terrible at eccentric contractions. This is going to be awful. You're going to be sore for a year. So we have a few more questions in chat. So about decoupling. So what do you look for in the decoupling? Is it, and the question, so I'm just going to read the question. Do you ascribe to the quote, let's do endurance until your decoupling is blank and then move on to the other zones? So asking I think the question is, what's the threshold for decision-making there?
With endurance, there's not a threshold. No, I mean, if somebody's, over a 5-hour ride, like early season, like it's happening with a lot of folks, like if you like for instance, one of the guys I coach, he's just coming off 2 weeks, almost entirely off the bike, and his first couple endurance rides, like 2 hours, he's significant amount of decoupling. But the thing is, like, he didn't want to go longer than that anyway, and I wouldn't want him to go longer than that. And so that's like a natural stopping point. And so it's not because there's decoupling, it's because that's the amount of time that's reasonable right now. Despite that he can ride as much as we want him to, 2 hours is enough right now. And the decoupling is an artifact of that, but it's not a decision maker. If, for instance, somebody's in fairly good shape and they're used to doing 5-hour rides, and we always see like 5 or 10% decoupling based on like the heat and the fatigue and the diet and blah blah blah, then it's like, okay, well, that's some decoupling. But over the long term, you want to see that decoupling go down. But as summer comes on, sometimes it doesn't, and you've got to like kind of weigh these factors. But it's not really a decision maker. Usually, like with a sweet spot workout or something like that, if there's a lot of decoupling that I'm not used to seeing in somebody, my first question is like, are you feeling okay? Are you tired? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say yes. Or like the heart rate will change. Like interval 2, it'll be higher. Interval 3, it'll be lower. And I'll be like, are you feeling better in interval 3? And they'll be like, yes, I was. Thank you.
Looks like we have one more question in chat. So this person is wondering why you should be using RPE, and is the reason due to the size principle? And if so, then are you supposed to back it off when you feel you're pushing too hard to stay within the suggested RPE? And does that mean that this is not fatiguing any additional motor units, or is that the goal? And if the answer is you should listen to this specific podcast, they say that's fine.
Okay, so does that have to do with the size principle? No. Decoupling can happen for a lot of reasons, and once you kind of eliminate all the other reasons, then yeah, it's definitely from recruiting larger motor units. But that depends on like how much like fast twitch and slow twitch fiber you have. If you're like 80-90% slow twitch and you're doing an endurance ride, you're not going to be touching your slow twitch or your fast twitch fibers. And even if you are experiencing the getting into larger motor units, they're going to be just as efficient as the ones that you were initially using, and so you're not going to see any of that increased O2 requirement needed to put out the same amount of power, because it's really just the efficiency thing. With somebody like me, like I'll see decoupling in like an hour endurance ride because I'm like 80% fast twitch fiber at this point. So yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with it really. Yeah, you should always just keep it to the RPE because, because once you start going over, like especially with endurance rides, once you start going over that, what happens is you are actually starting to really dig into your carbohydrate stores, and that's going to cause some decoupling. And if that's where it's like especially for triathlon, a lot of distances, like you're going to be in that zone, where your race distance is going to put you over your all day endurance pace, but it's going to be like below like FTP, and you've got to like figure out how to pace that, and that's another workout in itself. That's not like an endurance training workout. That's like a like a race pace. Like we got to figure out how to like get your brain to gauge how hard you need to go based on how far you've gone, and like that, like that's another like RPE skill in itself.
We definitely have to like let you go soon because I know it's 9 o'clock on the East Coast, and also like we have to cut it off at some point. But one of the things I found amazing about your company is the book list on the Empirical Cycling Library.
Oh, sure.
I opened up that link and I was like, and then you like scroll down, you're like, oh my God. So a lot of the titles on there, I think a lot of our listeners will be familiar with, like Roar is on there, Jack Daniel's Running. Then there are some on there like Power, Sex, and Suicide.
Yeah, that's right here.
Nice. And then the one that I was most sort of like intrigued by, an introduction to error analysis. It's just such
that's over right here. It's over on that shelf. Yeah. Oh, well, that was one of those things where like I got that because I was going to take an extremely advanced physics course, and I just ended up, kind of flipping through that book, and I was like, I like this book. I kind of understand error analysis a little better now. I didn't do all the problems in it, but I understand, but it got me to understand like error propagation and things like that. And I was like, oh, maybe, this helped me. It might help somebody else.
How did it show up in your coaching?
Just by, every time I do modeling of something, there's always error. Like, and the more things that you make assumptions on, the larger that error stacks up, and the less accurate your final thing is going to be. And so you always have to keep it really simple and think, like, what is the bare minimum number of assumptions that I can make before I can really say for sure what's happening. And even in like power analysis, it's very a lot of assumptions have to be made, and so a lot of the time you can't really say anything too definitive. One of the people I coach, she's a math PhD, and she has some very, very incisive questions for me. and she's like, you can't really know this. And I'm like, I know, but this is the best we got.
That sounds so fun.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I feel like we could stay here and ask you questions all night, but as Chris said,
I'm actually wide awake, which is unusual for me. So if you got more questions for me, I have some time.
I think we're through the ones in chat. We haven't gotten to meet your cats yet, which I know was one of the big asks that.
They're actually out in the hallway sleeping right now. I'm sorry.
Ooh, I want you to break some more of our triathletes' hearts. And
oh God, I'm sorry, everybody.
So erg mode.
Okay.
Beloved by triathletes, but sometimes not always not always incredibly helpful. I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about why erg mode can like let us down as athletes.
I find erg mode to be like the ultimate manifestation of X watts equals Y adaptations. And that's really not at all the case. And so if you like a lot of the time, especially with like over threshold work, excuse me, like a lot of people will go, oh, this is my VO2 max power. But if that were really true, you would be able to like do a minute there and 5 minutes rest and a minute there and 5 minutes rest. And you could accumulate 100 minutes of that in a couple days, without that much fatigue, but you're really not working VO2 max. You've got to think about what's happening underneath. Like, and I've got an 8-hour series on that if you want to listen. But erg mode is like, I think it's like the ultimate manifestation of that, because it really says like the numbers are static, and they're not. Like LT1 can vary a lot in a ride, and so you always want to ride to RPE for things like that. And like threshold, like things like threshold, like fortunately for that, like they don't change that much. So if somebody wants to do like a sweet spot workout or an FTP workout with erg mode, I think that's okay. I'd prefer they don't, because you need to get used to like pacing yourself and having to maintain that and having to have that focus, especially in triathlon where, it's just you and the road. Sometimes you got other people around, but like, it's just, I just have to pedal. How long do I have to pedal? Like, what's my distance? Oh God, I have to do this for another like 4 hours. Learning that mental focus can take a lot, but at some points, I mean, yeah, like you need it. You need to like have that mental break, like with mountain bikers, in the week 3-4 of a really hard build cycle, sometimes I got to put them on the road bike because they're too tired to ride off road. And, if they hit this technical second or single track, like they're going to get hurt because mentally they're just tired, but, they can do a little more. So, that's one of those things where it's useful on occasion, but I think it's better to always be calibrating your brain and getting really good at that. Because at some point you're not like, your brain's going to be your brain's going to be the only erg mode you need. You're going to tell your brain, do this, and your brain's going to go, got it.
You are keeping us in t-shirts over here with your your brain is the only erg mode you need. And the last question from chat. Do you have your athletes do single leg drills? And are your cadence and drills more specific than that? Some research shows that pulling up on the pedal might actually be less efficient. So if you do these drills, is there a different reason why?
I do, especially for track athletes, because on the track, when, you're on 92, 96 inches in a, like a cat 2, cat 3 bunch race that, may or may not be going that fast. Well, that's another gearing is another thing altogether there. But like, you can typically expect to be sprinting at like 140 to 150, 160 RPM. And that's something that you have to get used to. And so having that neuromuscular coordination of knowing when to like turn on and off your muscles, and also having that practice matters a lot too, because, rapid contraction and relaxation is a slightly different version of adaptation than just like, pedaling at 90 RPM at FTP. Like there are different things happening there. Like there's different glycogen stores and things like that. And, you're training your sarcoplasmic reticulum and, neurally and the whole signal transduction pathway like that gets better. But for the pulling up on the pedal thing and stuff like that, like, I mean, I actually do have people do single leg pedal drills sometimes, but only as like a primer, because I find it makes the high cadence stuff a little better. Because, now you're engaged into that full circle thing. And when you're trying to like turn everything on and off, it really makes you think. But when you've got two legs in there, it's a lot different, because, when one leg's generating power, it's like, the other leg may or may not need to be pulling up. And, the body finds low energy troughs wherever it can, like when you hurt your ankle and you spend the first like 5 minutes like trying to figure out the right way to walk, because if I walk this way, that's it doesn't hurt, but I'm really tired, like this is not efficient. And you try a couple different things, and then by then it's like you're better. You just walk normally again. But that's what your brain is doing, and that's what you're doing when you are doing pedaling stuff. So it's really important for track cyclists, I think, anybody who's going to pedal fast. But for average cyclists, it's I would say it's probably not as important as you think. I think being able to pedal fast and be smooth helps a lot, especially when you get really tired. Because then you're not like clamping down on your muscles and trying to keep them tense. You know how to relax them and spin them. Um, but yeah, but pulling up actually is really really important for sprinters. You can actually add a lot more watts, like 10 to 20% more power in a sprint by pulling up really hard. But you're also going to like risk pulling your foot straight out of your pedal, so you've got to make sure you're set up for that kind of thing. Yeah, so yeah, but mostly just doing a lot of pedaling and doing some pedaling like a little faster than you're used to. That might be all you really need to work on the your own pedaling and getting comfortable there. Did I think I answered it? I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Coley, this was awesome. This was like this is a real treat for me, especially. I've been devouring your podcast for a while now, and I think some of my athletes are probably not so happy that I discovered some of the things that you prescribed. But I did do. I tried out the high cadence VO2 max intervals myself first. So
they're rough, aren't they?
They are terrible. They are.
They were like the first workout I ever actually really really did, like the first interval workouts I ever did, because somebody got me for Christmas a Carmichael training video where Dean Gullich was there giving people 120 RPM 3-minute all out, and I had to stop like a minute in because I'd never breathed that hard in my life before or since. and I was like, wow, this sucks. I think I'm not going to do this ever again. I put it aside. And then later, after I knew Dean a little bit, and he was talking to me about these, I was like, oh yeah. Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, they're insanely hard. I mean, I started at like 4x2 or 5x2 and was like, oh, geez, this is, and yeah, the breathing is the alarming part.
Yes. Yeah. You really, really feel like you're drowning.
Yeah.
And actually I have people do like special prep for those intervals too. Like we'll do high cadence, like anaerobic capacity workouts to prep, like 30 seconds all out at like 130 to 140 RPM. Stuff like that can help a little bit, but probably not going to be welcomed by many triathletes, but
but like I think every triathlete's still going to benefit from an improved aerobic capacity. So it's it's like well, like let's because I think what you were saying earlier about triathletes is right. Like they all end up in the messy middle. Like they sort of end up in that,
that's great.
Like that spot where they're not. And you see this with triathletes, like over a 3-year period, when they take up the sport, they get a lot better and then they stop because they don't stress the system beyond what they've kind of just by riding their bikes at middle intensities is going to do for them.
Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of studies will say, like endurance riding will improve your VO2 max, and it will to a point. Like for instance, I worked with a guy for a little bit. He's a doctor. He had to go, treat a pandemic or something. So he's not training at the moment, but for a little bit, like he was like, man, I think I'm at my genetic max or something like that. And I was like, well, we'll see where we can get you. And he did some VO2 max training, after like years and years and years of like really good endurance training and some okay FTP training, but he'd never really done VO2 max training. And immediately he had like 15-20 more watts than he thought possible. Actually, maybe it was 25. And he went to a time trial like not long after that, where he was like, I underdid this. And I was like, what do you mean? I looked at the power file and it's like steady. In the last 2 minutes, it's like up like 90 watts or something like that. And I was like, what happened? He goes, I didn't believe the number that I was seeing and that I could do it. And so I underpaced it by a lot. And I can't believe how much I've improved in like just a couple months. And that kind of thing shows that like, some people, yes, like some people will, be able to always improve their VO2 max by doing a lot of endurance training, but not everybody. And in fact, most people probably cannot. And I don't have any numbers to back this up. This is just in my experience. But, but if you're kind of at that point where, oh, my FTP is not really going up, you really need to do some dedicated VO2 max work, even triathletes. Because I'll be getting to this probably getting to this in the next series, but doing FTP training at a certain point will move your FTP out, but it's probably not going to move it up. And the same goes for endurance training and stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna call it there. You're getting some love in chat.
Oh, thank you, everybody. I cannot see the chat, so I'll have to believe you. They could be saying I hate these intervals.
There might be a little bit of both.
JP Lucas 14 says I could ask questions to Coley all day. Love the stuff you put out. So
email me or follow me on Instagram at Empirical Cycling, and every weekend I do an AMA in the stories, and you can ask your questions there or just email me for a consult. I'm around.
Everyone listen to the podcast. Go find Coley at Empirical Cycling on Instagram and at Empirical Cycling at gmail.com. Right. Thanks again so much for coming on. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. I was flattered to be invited to do something like this. Chris Molly, thank you so much.
We will have you back.
Amount of fun for us. Yeah,
I'll be here. Yeah, this was fun.
Soon, right. To everybody out there, if you're new to the Endurance School, please consider following us by clicking on the little heart emoji up on the upper right-hand corner. And for those of you who are familiar with our schedule, you will already know, but please come back and join us for yoga with Amy VT tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. PST. And we will see you all again soon. Coley, thank you again. Here is to a happier and faster tomorrow. Bye, guys.